Hey guys, tonight we're traveling somewhere dry, ancient, and surprisingly bureaucratic. You find yourself trudging down a narrow hallway lined with crumbling mud brick, your sandals making a soft crunch with every step. The air smells like hot dust, old clay, and something faintly roasted, probably barley. Around you, stone lions and half-worn wall carvings watch in silence, their chipped eyes following your sleepy shuffle through Babylon's oldest temple district. You pass through a low doorway into a quiet chamber filled not with scrolls or books, but shelves of flat, heavy tablets. Dozens, maybe hundreds, stacked like crusty bricks in dark cubbies. This is no modern library with rolling carts and paperbacks. This is a scriptorium, a Babylonian one. Welcome. A scribe hunched over a reed mat glances up. He doesn't say anything. He just raises one clay-smeared eyebrow, then keeps scratching away with a stylus on wet clay. The tool makes soft, earthy clicks as it bites into the surface, recording temple taxes, dream omens. Or maybe someone's overdue copy of How to Appease Marduk in 3 Easy Rituals. You won't find a single Dewey Decimal label here, but don't worry, you're in good hands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing sleepy comments from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail your fingers along a row of baked clay tablets, their wedge-shaped cuneiform text pressed deep into the surface. It's beautiful, in a brutalist way, like the Mesopotamian version of Times New Roman. Every tablet has a tag etched into it, usually a quick summary of what's inside, the name of the lending temple, and a date, which is often something like in the 2nd year of King Rim-Sin, on the 9th day after the great flooding of the barley fields. Imagine being the intern who has to calculate all that into a calendar. You pass a wall niche where bundles of styluses, narrow reed pens are stored. Some are stained black with ink, others clean and ready. The scribes here don't write with ink on paper, they carve one careful wedge at a time into slabs of soft clay. When the record is done, the tablet gets baked in the sun or a fire pit, locking that message in for thousands of years. It's essentially the ancient equivalent of save as PDF. In the corner, an older scribe snores quietly over a half-finished receipt. You watch as his head nods slowly forward and thunk hits the table. He blinks, wipes his face with his sleeve, and resumes carving as if nothing happened. You can't help but wonder if he's documenting an inventory of goats or late fees. Because yes, even here in the hallowed clay-scented halls of the ancient world, late fees existed. The Babylonian library wasn't just a repository of myth and law, it was a logistical operation. And if you think modern librarians are serious about returns, wait until you learn how one tablet overdue by a week could trigger a full temple dispute involving barley, a goat, and a very uncomfortable public apology ritual. Historians still argue whether these libraries were entirely public or reserved only for priests and scribes. But what's clear is that they ran like clockwork. Quiet clockwork. Dusty clockwork. And tonight you're part of it. A young apprentice enters arms, full of damp clay eyes, wide and anxious. He mutters something about a missing list of barley rations and a suspiciously sticky storage room. The scribe grunts and points him toward the back shelves. Tablets on rationing are usually near the tablets on flood predictions since, well, everything in Babylon eventually came down to what you could trade for food. And if someone forgot to return that crucial flood calendar, let's just say the consequences went well beyond a gentle reminder email. More on that soon. You lean against the warm clay wall, letting your shoulders soften. The rhythm of stylus clicks, the faint hiss of oil lamps, and the low murmur of scribes weaving through inkless history starts to lull you. Babylon wasn't always chariots and conquerors. It was math homework, late returns, and long debates over how to store a dictionary without cracking the shelf. In the scriptorium, the past wasn't grand, it was orderly, and that's somehow even more charming. Outside, the sun slips behind a ziggurat, casting long shadows through the narrow window. The air cools slightly. Someone yawns. A clerk stamps a tablet with the temple seal, then carefully wraps it in cloth and sets it in the ready for pickup pile. You watch as he picks up another one. The next borrower's name is smudged, but the due date is still there to be returned within 7 moons of the barley festival. We'll get to what happens if that deadline isn't met in just a bit. For now, take in the silence, the ceremony, and the soft scratch of clay. You've got 14 more sections to explore this ancient system of gentle threats and bureaucratic magic. You wander a little deeper into the scriptorium now, weaving your way past thick shelves of hardened clay and the occasional reed mat, where scribes sit cross-legged surrounded by stacks of tablets, like sleepy sentries guarding an alphabet army. You stop before a low alcove. Carved into the mud brick wall is a crude diagram, scratched in faded black dye. It looks almost like a chart or a floor plan, but it's not a map of the city. It's a catalog. Babylonian libraries, you discover, didn't rely on intuition or luck when finding a particular spell law or surprisingly long poem. No, they had systems, rows, levels, categories. And most importantly, clay cards. Each library tablet had its own metadata, scribbled summaries etched either directly onto the tablet itself, or in the case of more elaborate texts, attached via a smaller tag tablet that acted as a kind of index card. These little slabs were chained to their parent tablets by a clay loop, which is sort of adorable, like a baby notebook, refusing to leave its mom's purse. You examine one now. Its text reads something like hymns to Ishtar, followed by the name of the copyist and the temple of origin. You hold it up to the lamplight, noticing the delicate diagonal strokes along the edge, maybe a mark for the shelf row it came from, or perhaps a symbol for fragile contains emotional poetry. Historians still argue about that. Some believe these marks were part of a sophisticated early cataloging system, a kind of proto-library science that rivaled the famed Alexandrian methods centuries later. Others think it was just Enlil Bani being overly fussy. Speaking of Enlil Bani, you're about to meet him. You turn and notice a scribe watching you curiously. He's youngish, maybe in his 30s, though the fine dust coating his robes makes him look like part of the furniture. His hands are calloused fingertips, tinted with red ochre. He carries a satchel of styluses, tucked neatly under his belt, like a proud artist with brushes. He smiles faintly and motions for you to follow. You do, stepping carefully between stacks until you reach a small work area, more cluttered than most. This is Enlil Bani's domain. He doesn't introduce himself. Babylonian scribes aren't big on pleasantries, but he does offer you a seat beside his toolkit, a reed tray full of styluses, a half-used tablet, a jar of sweetened date paste, and a scrap of linen for wiping fingers. He's in the middle of inscribing a tablet titled Ritual Offerings to avoid snake bites during eclipse season. A real page-turner, if you ask him. While he works, you glance at the shelf behind him. It's organized with exasperating precision categories labeled in miniature cuneiform law codes, agriculture omens, dreams, recipes, and your favorite disputes and fines. Because yes, that's where the late fees live. You run a finger across a particularly worn title. It looks like an older text, possibly rewritten from a crumbling original. The edges are smooth from years of handling. The summary says, List of loans and returns, Temple Year 4. Inside, dozens of entries, names, titles, borrow dates, and one particular column you weren't expecting penalty applied. And that's when it hits you. This wasn't just an archive. This was an entire bureaucracy designed to monitor nudge, and when needed, gently scold borrowers. These weren't just librarians. These were cultural accountants. The clay version of a very patient HR department. You ask Enlil Bani gently what happens when someone forgets to return a tablet. He blinks again, then shrugs. Sometimes he says they just never come back. Used the tablet as part of a ritual, and well, oops, it ended up buried in a sacrificial pit under a goat. You blink. He shrugs again. Clay happens. But when the borrower was alive and well, and had simply forgotten, then yes, consequences ensued. Subtle, quiet ones. This is Babylon, after all, not a Hollywood courtroom. He pulls a small tablet from his bag and passes it to you. It's older, cracked at the edges, and worn smooth in the middle, like it's been held a lot. You squint at the cuneiform. The top line reads, Notice of delay, 5th month, rainy season. Beneath that, a name, Kudur Malik. The offense. Returned him to Ishtar, 8 days late. Excuse pilgrimage. There's a line drawn under it, a mark meaning fee paid. The penalty, 1/8 of a shekel's worth of barley. Barley. You try not to laugh, but Enlil Bani does. Good grain, he mutters, in Akkadian, tapping his belly. Fair trade. It turns out the Babylonians often measured small fines in grain, barley being the standard. You could pay your debt in clay tokens too, or on rare occasions livestock if the borrowed item was considered sacred or high value. Like if you lost the Epic of Gilgamesh and tried to replace it with a polite shrug. But what's wild is this, the libraries had schedules, charts, systems of expectation. The due date for most standard temple tablets was 7 days. That's right, 1 Babylonian week. But scholars still argue whether that was a rigid law or more of a polite guideline. Some texts indicate flexibility, like during the flood season or after a solar eclipse when everything was upside down anyway. Others suggest late returners could receive a stern public reading of their mistake in front of peers. That's right, public literary shaming. It's the ancient equivalent of having your overdue notice read out loud at the DMV while everyone stares at your sandals. You picture a gathering of scholars around a stone bench, one of them clearing his throat as he reads, "To Kudur Malik, you who delayed the sacred scroll of harvest songs, may your beard grow unevenly and your barley spoil in storage, harsh but poetic." And Lil Bonnie chuckles and taps the shelf above. Some fines weren't paid, he admits. But we remembered. Always. You look up at the titles lining the wall, rows upon rows, each holding more than just myth and law. They hold the rhythms of a people obsessed with memory, with record, with not letting anything slip, not even a late hymn. The room dims slightly as clouds drift past the narrow window slit above. Somewhere in the distance you hear the soft clang of a bronze bell marking a temple hour, or maybe just the changing of scribes on duty. You glance at a tablet sitting alone on a reed mat. It's thinner than most, probably private. You pick it up. There's a smudge where the text begins, but you can just make it out. To the gods and to the keeper of records, may this return be timely. It's a prayer, a little borrowed item being offered back wrapped in words, not rope. You set it gently back down. There's something calming about it all, really. The system, the rituals, the quiet trust that people would borrow stories, read them. You're starting to see why Enlil Bani loves his job. It's not just about preserving laws or keeping track of temple debts. It's about holding on to stories, ensuring memory doesn't wash away in the next flood or get trampled under the sandals of some conquering king. Every mark on every tablet, every stylus, stabbed wedge is a human trying not to forget. As you lean back against a shelf, Enlil Bani picks up another tablet and begins carving with practiced calm. His hands move slowly, deliberately. The strokes of his stylus echo gently off the walls. The hum of clay, the hush of lamplit quiet, and the soft sacred order of a borrowed world, all lulled into place by nothing more than a late fee paid in grain. Outside, the first drops of rain start to tap against the mud brick wall just soft enough to hear. Inside, Babylon waits. You're back in your seat legs, tucked beneath you on a woven reed mat. The scent of warmed clay and faint myrrh still thick in the air. And Lil Bani sits beside you, scribbling, with one hand nibbling on a date with the other. He's about to tell you a story, not from a tablet, but from memory. A scandal, he says, one for the clay annals. You lean in, and he begins. It happened in 1741 BCE, give or take a year, depending on which chronicle you believe. That was the year the high temple of Isagila nearly descended into what the scribes called a disruption of decorum, which is Babylonian for mild chaos with strongly worded clay notes. It all started when a scribe named Nabu Zer Mukin borrowed a tablet from the sacred collection, specifically one of the older copies of Enki's instructions to the salt workers. A niche title, you think, but apparently a big deal in agrarian planning. It was supposed to be returned in 12 days. It wasn't. On day 15, someone noticed. On day 20, a junior priest, accidentally knocked over a shelving unit while looking for it. On day 21, the high scribe demanded a formal complaint tablet be filed, which it was, with flourishes, in triplicate. Now there's no confirmed version of what happened next, because historians still argue whether Nabu-Zermukhin actually lost the tablet, or whether he had loaned it to someone else without permission, which would have been both unethical and extremely frowned upon by the priesthood. Some claim he buried it by accident during a ritual purification in the river. Others believe it was eaten by goats. Enlil-Bani insists the truth is even worse. Nabu-Zermukhin had used the back of the tablet to jot down some personal notes, including an unflattering doodle of the high scribe with an exaggerated nose. This, in Babylonian librarian terms, was the nuclear option. The punishment: public apology, a fine in barley, a week-long demotion to tablet dryer, which, if you're wondering, meant standing outside in the sun, making sure fresh tablets didn't warp or crack while drying. Tedious work. Very dry. But there's more. To ensure it never happened again, the temple introduced a new policy, the preemptive loan log. It required borrowers to fill out a full entry before borrowing, complete with tablet serial, loan date, scribe witness. And this is a short justification for why they needed it. A kind of early, dusty version of request access to this document. You glance across the room at a slanted shelf marked Loan Tablets, Year Records. Enlil-Bani nods in its direction and says, "That's where we started keeping double copies. One for the borrower, one for the archive." You imagine the scene, the scribe handing over a heavy tablet, like a sacred relic, the borrower bowing, touching it reverently, knowing full well that clay doesn't forget. If you were late returning that sacred salt-working guide again, you'd owe not just grain, but reputation. Babylon cared deeply about record and respect. Even clay mistakes left permanent impressions. Literally, you ask if the original Enki's instructions was ever found. Enlil-Bani shrugs. "No," he says, "but someone eventually rewrote it, mostly from memory." You smile. Of course they did. This is a culture where writing meant immortality. Even a small instruction about cleaning salt pans during the dry season got immortalized in a new edition. With slightly better grammar, he adds proudly. Outside, the rain slows to a hush. The oil lamp beside you flickers slightly, casting a golden gleam across the face of a half-finished invoice tablet. Someone's goat donation, maybe, or a grain count from a delayed return. The scriptorium breathes alive with tiny scratches and clay-smudged dreams, and you, nestled between the past and a pile of temple disputes, feel it, that strange, sleepy safety that only truly old bureaucracy can offer. You blink slowly, the golden glow of the oil lamp soft against the walls, your fingers now tracing the carved surface of a fresh tablet. Enlil-Bani, now in full storytelling mode, pulls another clay square from a woven satchel behind him. This one is heavier, rougher, and its script more deliberate, almost ceremonial. "You want to borrow the Epic of Gilgamesh," he says, as if you've just asked for something as common as a pillow. He gives you a look that's equal parts admiration and suspicion, like you've requested to borrow his favorite pair of sandals. Borrowing a major epic isn't like checking out a recipe tablet for chickpea stew or a spell for making scorpions leave your bedroom. No, this is an ordeal. Step 1, the stylus ledger. Before anything is handed over, your name, well, the Babylonian equivalent of your name is etched onto a clay slip along with the title of the text. The tablet number, yes. Epics came in multiple tablets. Because Babylonian attention spans were long, when they wanted them to be the borrowing date and the expected return time. This was no formality. These ledgers were considered sacred bureaucratic tools reviewed during monthly temple audits. One smudged name could cause a scribe to lose access privileges. One missed tablet could mean reassignment to goat counting duty. Step 2, witness signing. No solo borrowing here. A second scribe had to approve your intellectual request by signing, or more accurately, etching a mark next to your own. This wasn't so much about trust as it was about backup. If you fled with the text, both of you got a friendly visit from a temple guard holding a strongly worded summons, and possibly a basket of clay debt notices. Step 3, the handoff. The tablet, let's say it's tablet 2 of Gilgamesh, is fetched by an apprentice, cleaned gently with a goat hair brush, and checked for cracks. These stories were copied painstakingly by master scribes and were more fragile than they looked. A crack down the middle of the flood tablet. You'd be remembered as that guy for centuries. The apprentice wraps it in linen and hands it over. The feeling is somewhere between being handed a sacred relic and picking up an overdue casserole dish from your neighbor. You nod, you bow, and off you go with about 5 kilograms of clay under your arm and the full weight of Mesopotamian morality on your back. That night, you sit on your roof under the stars. The tablet is warm from your body heat. You read the story of the great king Gilgamesh, of Enkidu, of gods and monsters, and the grief of immortality. You read it by torchlight, mouthing the symbols with care, your stylus, resting nearby in case you feel moved to annotate. You promise yourself you'll return it in 7 days. But day 6 brings rain. Day 7 brings a parade. One of those full city affairs with horns, bulls, and someone yelling about wheat prices. Day 8. You're in bed with a mild stomach curse from some questionable lentils. And suddenly you're late. Not dramatically late. Just late enough. And you know that means one thing, a fee. You trudge back to the scriptorium, epic in tow, only to be greeted by Enlil Bani with a raised eyebrow and a stylus already poised. He asks the reason for the delay. You mumble something about parade-related blockage. He nods, jots it down. Barley, he says, without looking up. 1 handful. You dig into your pouch. Hand it over. The barley clinks gently into a ceramic bowl. The epic is rewrapped. The ledger updated. No one yells. No one scolds. It's done. And somehow you feel more seen than shamed. Historians still argue whether these procedures were universal or specific to temple libraries like Isagila or Ikra. Some believe provincial towns skipped the witness step. Others insist major cities like Ur had even stricter loan procedures involving small charms tied to tablet tags like a library card with spiritual insurance. You look back at Enlil Bani as he files your epic in its cubby. He doesn't thank you, just nods, like a fellow record keeper acknowledging another soul who understands that memory true. Memory is borrowed, shared, and always worth tracking, even when it's late. You're sitting by the tablet shelves again, legs comfortably numb, watching the last sliver of sunset bleed through a narrow temple window. And Lil Bonnie leans in with a grin that says, "Want to hear some real dirt?" Before you can answer, he begins whispering about one of the most infamous events in the quiet history of Babylonian librarianship. The overdue tablet scandal of 1741 BCE wasn't the only time things got heated over late returns, but it was the one that made it onto tablets carved in bold. This particular scandal involved a very valuable set of incantations, specifically a rare collection titled The Divine Council of Enki Instructions for Bathing Rituals. Doesn't sound spicy. Just wait. The borrower was no regular citizen. It was a junior priest named Sin, freshly initiated into temple duties, and according to Enlil Bani, far too confident for someone who hadn't even mastered goat-bleeding interpretation. He checked out the ritual texts on the 9th day of the waxing moon, recorded properly in the ledger with a witness and everything. Then, nothing. Days passed, then weeks. No return. At first, the scribes assumed it was a beeping delay. Those ritual incantation tablets were notoriously hard to replicate, fragile, dense, written in a dialect half the scribes didn't even pretend to understand. But then someone spotted Sin at a street festival, reciting something suspiciously poetic to a group of very charmed onlookers. You guessed it, he was using the sacred bath instructions as pickup lines. Now, to modern ears, that might sound quirky, even endearing. To Babylonian temple librarians, it was nothing short of blasphemy. Not because he misused sacred knowledge, but because he failed to return the dang tablet. The matter was brought before the high scribe in an emergency clay tribunal. Witnesses were called. A tablet was presented that still bore his greasy fingerprints because, yes, you can leave prints on sun-baked clay if your fingers are slathered in date syrup. The ruling Sin had to copy by hand the entire contents of the Divine Council of Enki, all 6 tablets worth, under direct supervision, with a dull stylus, and no talking. It took him 46 days, and his barley fine tenfold the original borrowing fee because the tablets had been returned sticky in a temple. Historians still argue whether the fine was meant more for the physical damage or the social embarrassment. You let your head rest against the cool wall, imagining the scene, this once proud priest muttering under his breath, wrists cramping, while Enlil Bani watched with a cup of water and zero sympathy. Scribe justice was real, and it came slowly, one careful wedge stroke at a time. What's remarkable is that a copy of Sin's punishment draft still exists. Enlil Bani keeps a fragment tucked behind a shelf. He pulls it out and lets you examine the rough clay there. It is his cramped handwriting, messy, a little rushed, but still legible. A real slice of librarian justice, 700 years old, and still quietly hilarious. You trace the final line. It reads, "May Enki forgive this foolish scribe and his clumsy charm." A rare moment of self-awareness, and let's be honest, possibly added after someone scolded him for not showing proper remorse. The scandal reshaped borrowing policies too. From that point forward, Any borrower requesting ceremonial or ritual texts had to include a written affirmation of proper intent. Basically an ancient version of checking a box that says, I promise not to flirt with sacred bathing prayers. The priests also introduced clay slipcovers for certain high-touch texts designed to prevent casual finger syrup damage. They were fragile and ineffective, but it's the thought that counts. You glance around the scriptorium again, so many rows, so many stories, and realize that for every quiet, dusty tablet, there's probably a scandal or two hidden in the margins, the kind history rarely writes down. But scribes remember everything, even the sticky stuff. You stretch out your legs, toes brushing against the edge of a reed mat, and stare at the ceiling. Mud brick mottled with soot and the occasional ancient spider web. It's comforting in a dusty sort of way. And Lil Bonnie sits beside you again, nursing a bowl of cooled barley tea, eyes fixed on nothing in particular as he starts muttering about time. Not the grand philosophical kind. No stars, no destiny, just deadlines. So what was considered late, you ask? Because it's time we tackle the meat of this whole system. He exhales through his nose like someone preparing to explain taxes to a toddler. 7 days. That's the default. Most tablets B, they hymns, civic records, or snake banishing instructions were loaned out for a week. But it wasn't arbitrary. This wasn't just 7 is a nice number logic. Babylonian culture revolved around cycles of sevens, moon phases, purification schedules, temple feast planning. It made sense to them, cosmic even. But there were exceptions. Lots of them. See, Babylon may have loved its bureaucracy, but it wasn't exactly known for consistency. Deadlines were loosely enforced, but reasons mattered. If your sheep got stuck in a canal, or your roof caved in during the barley rain, yes, that's a thing. The scribes might forgive you. And Lil Bonnie even recalls one borrower who returned a tablet 12 days late but claimed it had been used in a dream ritual during an eclipse. That one was waived. Why? Because no one wanted to argue against a moon omen. Historians still argue whether these leniencies were formalized or just a result of scribe mood swings. One theory suggests that high-ranking scribes had forgiveness quotas, a set number of late returns they could excuse without administrative backlash. Another theory says they just didn't want to deal with the paperwork. You raise an eyebrow. Babylonian paperwork. Oh yes. Scribes didn't just record loans. They logged the excuses. You could walk into the library, cheeks red with guilt, and offer your reason. It would be judged on a very loose scale, somewhere between harvest emergency and I forgot because I fell asleep reading it on my roof. Both happened. Frequently. There were even established, if unofficial, rankings of excuses. The best ones: floods, priestly duties, dreams from gods, and anything involving animal misbehavior. Babylonians loved blaming goats. The worst laziness. And my neighbor borrowed it without asking. That last one got you double fined. So what happened when you were officially late? You'd find a small stamped notice on a thin slip of clay left at your home or given to your temple superior. It was brief, polite, and absolutely dripping with passive aggression. Something like, "To Akil Ilani, the prayers of Marduk await your attention. Delay has been noted." It doesn't say return your overdue tablet, dummy, but the tone, oh, the tone. And Lil Bonnie once composed one that said, "Your borrowed hymns have not sung themselves back to us. Please advise." poetic. Brutal. But if that didn't work, if 2 or more clay reminders went unanswered, you were issued what's now referred to as a tablet claim. This was more formal, filed in duplicate, and sometimes publicly read in temple. It was essentially your name carved into eternity with the label delinquent reader. Most people gave the tablet back before it came to that. The fees, while not ruinous, still mattered. A small hymnal might cost you a handful of barley. A rare omen tablet, maybe 2 shekels worth. For sacred or ceremonial works, fines sometimes included ritual atonement gestures like sweeping the library floor at dawn for a week, or reciting purification verses while balancing a clay slip on your head. That last one, according to Enlil-Bani, was invented as a joke and somehow stuck. Still, this entire system worked because of something Babylon had in spades: social pressure. Everyone knew who had borrowed what. The ledgers were public. If you walked around pretending you didn't have volume 3 of the king's healing recipes, someone would absolutely call you out, probably while holding a stylus and a smug expression. It wasn't a punitive culture, it was a performative one. You were expected to care, to respect the clay. And if you didn't, you got fined, lightly mocked, and maybe had to copy 5 pages of omen verse until your wrist felt like goat jerky. You sigh and lean back impressed despite yourself. All this for tablets, for words pressed into clay. And yet something about it feels more structured, more respectful than any modern return policy you've ever ignored. Enlil-Bani leans over and whispers, "I once fined my uncle." You blink. He returned a farming calendar 3 weeks late. Claimed a fox stole it. You wait. It was under his bed. You both nod solemnly, like 2 monks contemplating sacred irony. You roll a small clay tag between your fingers, its etched wedges catching faint light from the flickering oil lamp beside you. Enlil-Bani, now very much in full teacher mode, opens a narrow drawer in a low cabinet and retrieves a handful of pale, perfectly rectangular tablets, thinner than most, smoother around the edges. Each bears the same ominous little mark on the bottom corner: a sheep. Fee schedules, he says, as if revealing state secrets. And in a way he is. These were not texts of law or legend. These were the operational heart of Babylon's tablet system ledgers, carved not with poetry or spells, but penalties. Columns of names, titles, dates, and consequences. You lean in. One reads borrowed hymns of spring, returned 11 days late. Paid 1.5 handfuls of barley. Another borrowed healing herbs for horses, returned broken. Paid 1 sheep young. You choke slightly. A sheep Enlil-Bani nods. Not uncommon, especially for damaged items. Turns out the Babylonian equivalent of you break it, you buy it involved livestock. Barley was the standard fee, sure. But depending on the item and how badly you mangled it, you could be charged dates, textiles, crafted goods, or, yes, living animals. The scribes even had a formal system of equivalencies. A full-grown sheep, worth roughly 2 mid-sized ceremonial scrolls or 1 prophetic dream tablet. A bushel of barley, equal to 3 minor omen tablets. or one borrowed collection of jokes. Yes, Babylon had those, mostly puns involving donkeys and temple builders. And if you're wondering how people transported sheep to pay off library fines, well, slowly. Babylonian scribes weren't expected to herd goats, so payments were usually processed through temple staff. You'd drop the animal off, get a stamped tablet receipt, and if it was a large fine, have your name cleared from the ledger in a brief ceremony involving incense and a stern look. Public shaming was also a form of penalty. For chronic offenders, the high scribe might read their names aloud in temple meetings often, with little theatrical flourishes added. Let it be known that Dumuzi the miller has returned the farming almanac 23 days late. May his fields yield weeds and his ink always smudge. The sheepskin warning tablets, those were something else entirely. You find one now cracked but intact. It reads, "If this text be borrowed and not returned, may the borrower's ink dry mid-thought." A curse. A small one, but specific and potent. These weren't meant to actually summon demons. Rather, they were spiritual pressure, social and supernatural shaming rolled into one compact hex. Historians still argue whether such curses were drafted by scribes themselves or requested by the tablet creators. Some evidence suggests that particularly prestigious authors, usually priests or astrologers, added their own curses like a copyright notice. 3 handfuls of barley, each owns 1 short delay. On omen texts, others believe scribes fed up with constant delays slipped them in unprompted. One famous example, a warning inscribed on a medical text that reads, "Whoever steals or delays this guide shall find his teeth traded for scorpions." You pause. Teeth traded, and Lil Bonnie nods solemnly. We had strong feelings about dental hygiene. Another thing to note, not all curses were serious. Some scribes got cheeky. One punishment tablet includes the line, "May your stylus become as dull as your thoughts." Brutal. What emerges is this layered system, part accountability, part dark comedy, all wrapped in a logic of community trust. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone mostly respected them. And those who didn't, they paid with grain sheep or mild embarrassment. You ask if anyone ever just disappeared with a tablet, ran off to start a rival library in another town. And Lil Bonnie considers this. Once, a scribe named Zikru took 3 omen tablets to Ur. Never returned. What happened? He grins. Ur banned him from their own library. Then someone copied the tablets anyway. So justice in the end prevailed quietly, methodically, like it always does, in a world ruled by stylus. Points and soft clay. You watch as he files one of the penalty ledgers back into place, wiping the surface clean with a cloth dipped in rose water and oil. He does it with care, as if preserving not just a record, but a legacy. The lamp flickers again. Outside, you hear the faint braying of sheep. Somewhere someone's returning a very overdue scroll. You're sitting now in what Enlil Bani calls the value chamber, though to your modern sensibilities, it just looks like a corner closet with better shelves and a suspicious number of goat-shaped etchings. These particular tablets are set apart. For a reason, they're not just texts, they're transactions. and some of them read like a barter-themed bedtime story. He picks up a medium-sized tablet, sets it in your lap, and taps it with the blunt end of his stylus. Goat story, he says. That's your cue to settle in. This one's dated to the 25th year of King Ammisaduka's reign, give or take a flood. It's a lone record involving a temple scribe, a baker, and yes, a goat. The item in question: a rare 2 tablet set on seasonal star rituals. Not the kind of thing one just lends lightly. But the baker insisted he needed it to prepare an offering during a lunar festival. You scan the record. Borrowed 2 tablets. Loan duration 10 days, returned 13 days late. Penalty: 1 full-grown goat unblemished. Traded at market value for knowledge preserved. Yes, the goat became the fee. It's hard not to smile, imagining the poor creature getting walked up the temple stairs by a red-faced baker muttering apologies. The scribe would have accepted it, solemnly handed over a stamped receipt, and immediately added it to the temple's livestock log, which Enlil-Bani now helpfully retrieves for you. 3 goats in 1 moon, he says, flipping through the tablets. 1 for damage, 1 for lateness, and 1 in apology. You ask whether the goat was symbolic or literal. He looks at you like you've just questioned the validity of math. Very real goat, he mutters. We used it for ink. Wait, ink, he explains. In Babylon, animal fat was sometimes rendered into base material for ink production, especially for ceremonial writing. So that late goat, it might have been turned into the very words that replaced the lost star tablet, circle of life. Very literary. But goats weren't the only currency. Enlil-Bani shows you a list of item equivalencies from a particularly meticulous scribe who apparently had a passion for lists. 1 goat equals 2 damaged minor hymnals. 1 small jug of beer, apology, fine for returning a text upside down, a real offense. 1 woven mat equaled damage to text caused by spilled oil. 5 temple incense sticks equals borrowing sacred funeral songs without clearance. The part about returning a text upside down, that really happened. You raise an eyebrow. Enlil-Bani shrugs. Orientation matters, he says. Would you enjoy reading the stars backwards? You suppose not. Some of these penalties seem petty, but in a society where texts were hand-carved, unique, and spiritually significant, preservation wasn't just about keeping records. It was about maintaining balance. Breaking a tablet wasn't like snapping a book spine. It was a rupture in the temple's chain of memory. You wonder how borrowers felt bringing in a goat for a forgotten return. Was it shameful, awkward? Enlil-Bani nods. Both, he says. But mostly just expected. In a world where everyone knew everyone, you couldn't sneak off with volume 2 of How to Cleanse a House After a Fire and not have a neighbor ask, hey, didn't you borrow that 2 moons ago? Accountability was communal. Penalties weren't punishments. They were corrections. Gentle nudges. Public reminders that memory once loaned had to be repaid. And it wasn't always livestock. Enlil-Bani recalls 1 borrower who offered a song as apology, composed, performed, and inscribed by hand. It was accepted, and it's now filed under cultural fines miscellaneous. He's never played it, but he thinks the meter was off. Outside, the sky darkens fully, and a breeze rustles through the high window, carrying with it the scent of date palms and old stone. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the soft hum of scribes murmuring in the next room. Somewhere in the stacks, a goat-shaped stamp rests on a dusty receipt, quietly reminding future readers that even in Babylon, stories had value, and sometimes that value had hooves. Enlil Bani is quiet now, running his fingers along a darker shelf near the back of the room, a section he calls the sacreds. You follow him carefully, stepping over scattered bits of broken clay, catching the scent of something smoky and bitter in the air, maybe sandalwood or just very old dust. These tablets are different. The edges aren't rounded from handling. The carvings are deeper, more deliberate, protective. They weren't meant for borrowing. They were meant for warning. Enlil Bani pulls one down, gently lays it flat on a reed mat between you. It's blackened on one corner, as if it had once been scorched. On its face is no title, no borrower's name, just 5 lines of cuneiform, etched with the intensity of a court decree. He leans close and whispers the translation: "To he who withholds what is sacred, may the gods see your name fade. May your stylus shatter in ink. May your tongue turn backward in sleep. May clay turn to ash in your hand." You sit very still. That's not just a fee, that's a full-blown library curse. In the Babylonian worldview, words weren't passive. They carried power, especially when recorded. To defile damage or delay the return of sacred texts was to upset a cosmic balance, and the only way to keep readers honest, carve a curse into the clay. These protective invocations were most common on spiritual works: healing incantations, divination, manuals, hymns to Ishtar, or the dreaded funerary complaint scrolls, which no one wanted to read late at night. The curses were a way to ensure the reader treated the knowledge with reverence, or at least remembered to bring it back. You flip another tablet over and find a subtler version. This knowledge is not yours. Delay brings loss. Delay brings forgetfulness. Delay brings rust to memory. There's something beautiful in this idea that information, if hoarded, withers. Babylon wasn't just protecting clay, it was protecting circulation. Historians still argue whether these curses were symbolic or sincerely feared. Some say they were nothing more than the scribes venting their frustrations, ancient passive aggression in poetry form. Others believe the public did fear these inscriptions, especially when paired with temple omens or dreams that reinforced their effects. And Enlil Bani, he's somewhere in the middle. He tells you about a young scribe who once scratched a fake curse onto a borrowed recipe tablet as a prank, something about turning lentils into beetles, and how the borrower returned it the next day, shaking with a small pouch of salt as apology. I think he says that it doesn't matter if they believed. It mattered that they respected. He shows you the library seal next, an oval stamp pressed into the edge of major texts. It bears the name of the temple, the chief archivist, and in some cases a tiny etched symbol unique to that scribe: a star, a reed, a bird. Enlil Bani's is a small spiral. That seal, it wasn't just a signature, it was a bond, a declaration that this clay carried not just knowledge, but responsibility, and anyone who mishandled it might as well be mishandling the words of Marduk himself. And if curses weren't enough, They had clay charms, 2 small tokens. Baked alongside the tablet, sometimes slipped into the linen wrappings of special scrolls. These carried images of protective spirits, inscriptions from hymns or diagrams of the moon's phases. Not everyone could read them, but everyone knew they weren't to be ignored. You ask if Enlil Bani has ever cursed a tablet himself. He hesitates, then nods. Only once he says, "For a dream book I loved." He won't tell you the words, but he shows you where it sits, tucked high on the shelf, untouched since the day he etched the warning into its spine. You don't dare ask to borrow it. The room feels smaller now. Not darker, just closer, wrapped in the quiet authority of scribes who understood that memory is fragile and that sometimes the only way to protect it is with a whispered threat in wedge-shaped letters. You sit back, gaze at the rows of silent shelves, and wonder, what would a modern library look like if your overdue book could curse your email inbox? Clay never forgets. And in Babylon, neither did the librarians. You're deep in the library now, beyond the public shelves, beyond the fine fee ledgers, and into the part of the scriptorium where history blurs into art. A back room with uneven walls and faded murals welcomes you with the faint scent of old ink and smoked reeds. This Enlil Bani says is where the scribes kept their culture, and it's where the most enduring mystery be so. Librarian hats, he says, deadpan. You blink. Exactly, he continues as he motions to a dusty bas-relief carved into the wall. It shows 3 men seated at low desks, styluses poised above their heads. Hats, one round like a pot lid, one sharply pointed like a traffic cone, and one that, if you squint, resembles an upside-down basket of figs. Enlil Bani grins. Historians still argue about that, and they really do. Some scholars believe Babylonian scribes wore specialized hats to denote rank like badges of authority, but warmer. Others say the hats weren't real but symbolic, used in carvings to indicate intellect or temple loyalty. A few radical historians even suggest they were just fashion-forward nerds with poor ventilation. You're not sure what to believe, but you can't help picturing Enlil Bani in a fig basket hat sternly reprimanding a goat for chewing on a hymnal. He pulls a cracked relief tablet from the shelf. This, he says, shows the chief archivist at work. You squint. The figure is seated surrounded by standing aides and is definitely wearing something dramatic on his head, maybe a crescent or possibly a collapsed lampshade. There's also a curious inscription below it. He who wears the horned crown of knowledge sees the weight of memory bend the stars. Poetic. And completely useless if you're trying to actually design a hat. Still, the symbolism was potent. These hats, or at least the idea of them, represented more than fashion. They denoted role trust guardianship. To wear the scribe's crest was to be accountable for memory itself. And in Babylon, that meant everything. You ask if Enlil Bani wears one. He hesitates, then reaches under the table and pulls out a modest, folded wrap of cloth. Faded indigo. Smells faintly of rose oil and baked ink. I wear it when I audit, he says.
It keeps the readers respectful. You nod gravely, sensing a ritual here that even he's not entirely joking about. Of course, Babylonian librarians weren't all stylus and ceremony. There was a lighter side too. Enlil-Bani retrieves a joke tablet from a high shelf, thin, brittle, clearly meant for casual reading.
Some things are just meant to be remembered. Outside, the wind picks up again, rustling the woven blinds that cover the high windows. Dust drifts across the tablet shelves like a forgotten thought made visible. And you sit there in a room full of unreadable hats and half-remembered customs, thinking maybe, just maybe, the silliest questions are sometimes the most sacred ones. The next room Enlil-Bani leads you into smells peculiarly clean. Not fresh like a garden or fragrant like incense, but dusty clean like clay that's been cared for more than it's been touched. You immediately notice that the shelves here shine slightly, as if each tablet has been oiled or gently buffed. He waves a hand theatrically. "Welcome," he says to the clay bathhouse. You chuckle until you realize he's not joking. This is where tablets are cleaned. Babylonian clay tablets were durable, yes, but far from invincible. It contains satirical proverbs, including a jab at scribes themselves. A scribe without ink is like a goat with ambition, loud, stubborn, and writing nothing. That one gets an audible chuckle from a nearby apprentice. But the hats, they still return to your thoughts. Perhaps they were functional, protecting scribes from the sun as they dried tablets. Perhaps ceremonial, worn only during audits and equinox readings. Or perhaps imagined entirely by overzealous temple artists, desperate to add a little flair to an otherwise very beige job. Historians may never know. And honestly, that's part of the charm. Some truths in Babylon were written clearly in clay. Others, like the precise shape of the chief librarian's ceremonial headgear, were left to sleep quietly in the corners of the archive, waiting for the next dreamer to ask about them. Enlil-Bani rewraps his cloth hat and places it reverently in a drawer. "Not everything needs to be returned," he says, smiling softly. Over time, dust, soot, and grease from thumbprints, especially after eating roasted onions with bare hands, could build up on the surfaces. So once every cycle, roughly every 28 days, tied loosely to lunar rituals, each major archive would undergo a full cleaning. You watch as two junior scribes' heads, bowed, carry a tray of worn tablets to a shallow basin. It's lined with soft reeds and filled with a mixture of lightly perfumed water and something that smells faintly medicinal, likely goat milk soap and ashes of burned cedar bark. The process is precise. Each tablet is swirled gently in the basin, never submerged, never scrubbed, then patted dry with linen cloth. Afterwards, a fine goat hair brush is used to work away anything lodged in the cuneiform grooves. If necessary, a stylus is gently reapplied to redefine faint marks. Clay forgets nothing, Enlil-Bani says, but dust tries its best. Once cleaned, the tablets are placed on drying shelves, angled for airflow. Here, junior scribes fan them manually for hours. Why no drying kiln? Because reheating the clay risks micro cracks. It's a low-tech solution and oddly soothing to watch, like a very ancient version of air-drying pottery crossed with a high-stakes filing system. You ask if anything's ever been cleaned too hard. He sighs. Yes. Once. Then points to a thin, warped tablet on the wall, mounted like a trophy. That was the Hymn of 9 Vows. Apprentice scrubbed it with a reed bundle. We still read the third stanza as, "May the onions judge my spirit." You suppress a laugh. He doesn't. Cleaning was considered sacred duty. Each tablet, no matter how mundane, be it legal code or barley harvest tax log, was given the same careful attention. Why? Because scribes weren't just caretakers of data. They were custodians of clarity. A misread omen could doom a crop. A smudged measurement could cost someone a goat. Even a damaged love poem could create weeks of awkward misunderstandings between young nobles trying to woo each other through verse. Historians still debate whether this cleaning ritual had any official religious basis or if it was simply a practical method elevated to ceremonial status over generations. One theory suggests that lunar timing came from astrology. A clean library meant clean minds for dream interpretation season. Another theory: dust allergies. You eye a tall shelf labeled frequently soiled texts. It's mostly cooking recipes, medical scrolls, and something Enlil Bani calls the list of popular festival farts. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. People laugh. Then they spill things. He brings you a brush goat hair just like the others and lets you try it on an old practice tablet. You run it gently through the grooves, brushing aside crumbs of ancient grit. It's oddly satisfying. The lines become clearer. The surface catches more light. You feel strangely like you're helping the tablet breathe again, and maybe you are. When the cleaning's finished, the tablet is gently rubbed with perfumed cloth. Scribes used oils scented with cedar, myrrh, even rose petal. It wasn't just about preservation, it was presentation. A clean tablet smelled like care, respect, and continuity. No wonder Babylonian texts have lasted millennia. They were groomed like pets. You sit back, hands dusted in clay, the warm scent of oil rising around you. Enlil Bani nods toward the drying rack. Tomorrow, he says, we begin again. And just like that, you understand something unspoken. In Babylon, even memory needed maintenance. Not just carving and recording, but brushing, fanning, caring. Preservation was a ritual of gentleness. And somehow, as you exhale into the quiet room, you feel lighter, like someone's brushed dust off your own memory too. Some were warnings, some were guides, and some, he says, with a smile, were divinely pointless. He pulls one from the stack and sets it in your lap. The inscription is surprisingly short. I dreamed of a dog with 2 heads. One barked, the other prayed. I woke with a toothache. Below it, a line of interpretation means a divided household, or possibly dental illness. Watch the moon. You can't help it, you grin. Another tablet reads, dreamed. I rode a fish across dry land while holding a tablet of laws. Woke up tangled in my sleeping mat. Interpretation, authority without control. Avoid legal disputes. eat less lentil mash at night. Dream interpretation was a massive enterprise in ancient Mesopotamia. Entire collections, sometimes spanning dozens of tablets, were devoted to deciphering dreams through symbolic associations, planetary movements, and good old-fashioned superstition. What's even more fascinating, most of the dreams are anonymous, a world of people so far removed still whispering into the dark, trying to find meaning in the nothing that happens behind their eyes. And Lil Bonnie taps the side of the tablet. This one never left the temple. Too important. You ask why? He shrugs. Because everyone dreams. But not everyone returns. There's something in that. Something gentle, a little melancholy. You look around the dream chamber, at the anonymous messages, the muttered warnings, the hope wrapped in cuneiform, and you feel a quiet reverence. These weren't just stories. They were fragments of people, floating untethered now, preserved in clay. You lean back against the cool wall, eyelids heavier now. A part of you wants to close them here in this room just to see what comes through. And Lil Bonnie stands and begins lighting a small oil lamp shaped like a sleeping lion. We write dreams, he says softly, so we can return to them. Scribes wrote them down without attaching names, as if respecting some sacred privacy, even while cataloging subconscious wanderings. Historians still argue whether these texts were used in personal readings, temple rituals, or just as reference for the diviners who doubled as early psychologists. Some believe they were shared among scribes as entertainment, an ancient version of weird Reddit posts. And Lil Bonnie hands you one last tablet. This one is thicker, etched in a different hand, the strokes deeper. At the top, a stylized star and crescent. The title, Guide to Sleep Omens. It begins with a soft chant. If you sleep facing north and dream of flowing water, fortune shall pass your door. If you sleep facing east and dream of burning trees, beware of false judges. If you sleep and do not dream, the gods are silent or watching. You run your fingers over the lines. There's something oddly comforting about them, even now, thousands of years later. You wonder if someone someday will write your dream on a tablet, fold it into a shelf, and call it history. And maybe that's enough. The dream chamber fades behind you, its strange, smoky silence, replaced by the more familiar clay and sandalwood scent of the main scriptorium. You trail Lil Bonnie through a narrow corridor, ducking under a lintel marked with 3 small star glyphs, the Babylonian symbol for archival fiction, or as he calls it with a grin, the maybe shelf. It's here you stumble upon a curiosity that has plagued Babylonian scholars for generations, Volume 2. Or rather, the lack of it. He pulls down a carefully wrapped clay tablet titled The Epic of the River Reed, Volume 1. A heroic tale full of wind-swept landscapes and overly poetic metaphors for irrigation canals. You chuckle as he flips it open, so to speak, and reads a passage. Then the reed whispered its name to the storm, and the people of the water bowed in silence. Classic Babylonian flourish. But what's most striking is what comes next. A very clear ending note, to be continued in Volume 2.
You blink. Where's volume 2, you ask? He shrugs, like this isn't the first time he's had to answer that. No one knows. Scholars across the centuries have searched temple libraries, merchant archives, private scroll vaults. Nothing. No trace, no mention, no summary carved into someone's letter to their aunt. Some say it was lost. Enlil Bani murmurs. Some say it was never written. And that's the crux of the mystery. Because the epic of the River Reed was clearly important, written in fine script, copied at least 7 times across 3 major cities. It ends on a dramatic cliffhanger involving a prophetic eel and a festival of torches. People were expecting a sequel, and yet nothing. Historians still argue about it. One theory: the original scribe died before finishing it. Another: it was intentionally left unfinished, as a metaphor, an ancient artistic prank. Enlil Bani prefers a third theory, that volume 2 exists, but no one ever returned it. You stare, he nods. Borrowed before it was copied, taken home, set under a sleeping mat, forgotten. The idea is absurd, and yet it fits. He opens another tablet dated a few decades after volume 1. It's a note short and smudged, but legible, concerning the second Reed tale. I still await its arrival. The eel must return. You both laugh, the sound echoing off shelves full of legends that went nowhere. But the mystery lingers. Why do some stories endure and others disappear? How can a culture so obsessed with recording every barley transaction lose a full epic? Maybe Enlil Bani suggests some stories were never meant to be finished. Maybe they were meant to live in the waiting. You follow Enlil Bani deeper into the archive, past a veil of hanging reeds that sway with a whisper like turning pages. This is a quiet place, even by Babylonian standards. He lowers his voice as you enter a small chamber tucked behind a shelf labeled Omens, Dreams, Whispers. This, he says, is where we keep the strange ones. Your eyes adjust to the dimmer light. The shelves here are uneven, the floor more earthen than tiled. The air is thick with incense residue, frankincense maybe, or something more bitter like crushed poppy seed. Here the tablets are smaller, curved, less formal, like they weren't meant for public consumption. And they weren't. These, he explains, are dream tablets. You raise an eyebrow, intrigued. He gestures toward a stack of unusually rounded tablets, bound with old linen thread, collected over centuries, each one an interpretation. Babylonians believed dreams were messages, coded scrolls from the gods Enlil Bani calls them. Word count 1. Awaiting continue. For Oban Danoi. Continue. ChatGPT Danoi. Section 14. It's late now, though, in Babylon time is marked more by the flicker of oil lamps than the ticking of clocks. Enlil Bani moves slower, his voice softer, as he leads you into the most sacred part of the scriptorium, the ledger chamber. This isn't where the epics are stored. Not the hymns, nor the dream scrolls, nor the joke tablets. This is where Babylon kept its lists. Inventories, registries, end-of-season audits. the deep, dry heart of the record-keeping machine. It's also where Enlil Bani conducts his year-end ritual. He sits cross-legged before a massive stone slab, used as a table already stacked with reed pens, tally pebbles, and a fresh batch of blank tablets still warm from baking. Beside him lies an older clay ledger, heavier than most, wrapped in linen and sealed with a spiral stamp. This, he says, is the archive of returns. Once a year, every borrowed item, every tablet, every slip, every borrowed reed manual or omens digest is double-checked against the scriptorium's ledgers. One by one, every name is read aloud. Every borrowed work is matched with a physical return. If a tablet is damaged or replaced, it's marked. If it's missing, it's remembered. You sit with him as he begins. The cadence is soothing. Name item, return date, status. Ilu, Nana. Seasonal rights for lentils. Returned edge, chipped replacement accepted. Samas, sin. Clay tablet on lunar dyes. Returned correct seal, no damage. Ninsun, funeral etiquette for minor nobles. Overdue, still unresolved. Each line is read. Each note carved onto a new tablet, the year's master record. Once complete, the tablet will be stored in a sealed chamber, never to be edited again. Babylon didn't believe in deleting data, just archiving it deeper. You watch as he adjusts a tally pebble. He points to a small tag tablet, shelved separately, unassuming. It bears a single line. If found, please return to Temple Archive. Volume 2. It's a literal overdue notice. One that's waited for nearly 4,000 years. You wonder what other volumes were lost this way, what histories sat beneath cooking bowls or were washed away in spring floods, not out of malice, but out of life, messy, forgetful, normal. You scan the room again. So many titles, so many beginnings, so many ends, and so many midpoints that never quite made it. Maybe that's the true essence of Babylonian memory, not in its completeness, but in its yearning, its desire to remember what may never come back. And Lil Bonnie sighs, setting the tablet gently on its shelf. One day, he says, someone may write Volume 2 themselves, just to finish the dream. And maybe they will. Or maybe it's already written, still waiting on someone's dusty table next to a sleeping mat with a goat nibbling softly on the corner. It clicks against the others with a soft tink, shifting the year's numbers forward. Scribes didn't rely only on tablets they used, counting stones, tied knots, even marks on the walls, anything that kept the data flowing. And then you hear it, your name. Well, the Babylonian name you've been given, Itir Ilum. Itir Ilum. Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 2. Returned 1 day, late fee paid. He glances at you, smiling. Official now. The pace continues. You sip barley tea. The walls glow golden with lamplight. Each tablet placed in its row is a memory, closed a page, turned a promise kept. Occasionally he sighs when he finds a missing one. Occasionally he chuckles at a particularly odd title. Borrowed list of flattering things to say to temple cows. You raise an eyebrow. Real, he insists. Very popular. Historians still argue whether these audits were purely clerical or semi-spiritual.
He places the tablet on a high shelf, one more piece in a long chain of records stretching backward into time. Tomorrow, he says, a new ledger begins. Outside, the stars have gathered. The scriptorium for now sleeps. And somewhere, a goat still owes a library fine. The library is nearly still now quieter than it's been all night. Even the stylus clicks have stopped. The fire in the corner brazier has dwindled to embers. The warm shadows stretch like long sighs across the floor, curling into the corners of the scriptorium like sleeping cats. And Lil Banny walks slowly back to the central aisle. He moves with the practiced ease of a man who's memorized every crack in the floor, every wobble in the shelving, every title pressed into the side of every clay tablet. This is his world, and you've been a guest in it. In his hands is the final tablet of the night. It's small, unassuming, no dramatic title or curse. Some believe the reading of names served as a quiet prayer for the memory of each borrower. Others think it was just Enlil Bani, enjoying the satisfaction of checking boxes with clay authority. You ask what happens to missing items. He points to a shelf labeled unreturned. It's smaller than you'd expect, just a dozen or so tablets, each marked with the borrower's name, item title, and the phrase, still awaited. He never deletes them. One day, he says, they may come back. You sense he means that literally. That maybe one day a descendant, a wanderer, or a curious soul will walk in holding a wrapped tablet 30 generations late and say, I think this is yours. And it will be accepted. No fee, just a nod. The audit continues until the final name is read, the last pebble placed, the final wedge etched into the clay. And Lil Bani leans back, stretches his arms, and exhales slowly. Finished. You sit in silence. Not tired exactly, just full. Like you've eaten memory itself. Let the last words echo like a soft stylus on clay. The shelves are full. The stories are safe. The ledgers are closed. And you, like a forgotten epic, gently returned at last, are exactly where you belong. Sleep well, dream gently, and may your goats always return on time. End of script. Sweet dreams. Just one line written in smooth, even cuneiform, returned in good faith. Final record made. He slides it gently into an empty slot on the shelf. You watch as it nestles into place with a faint click. That's it, the last tablet returned. The oil lamp beside you burns low, and Lil Banny doesn't speak. He just nods once, then turns to begin the extinguishing ritual. One lamp at a time. He cups each flame between his hands, gently snuffing them, murmuring a few phrases you don't recognize, part prayer, part inventory list, part habit. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the hush that grows with each lamp dimmed. One flickers out, then another, then the last. The only light now is moonlight slipping in through the high window slits, painting faint silver stripes across the floor, and the spines of countless tablets, row upon row. History sleeping in columns. Stories pressed into stillness. You sit for a moment longer, barely breathing, absorbing the calm that only a fully returned archive can offer. And Lil Bani places his stylus into a small clay pot,
It lands with a soft clink. He wraps his cloth hat and tucks it beneath the desk. He doesn't say goodbye, he just whispers, "The shelves are full, that's enough." And with that, he disappears into the corridor, feet brushing gently against the stones. You remain seated, not because you have to, but because you don't want to disturb the air. This place isn't just quiet, it's whole. The stories are home, the ledgers are balanced. Even the goats, well, most of them have paid their dues. You rise at last and make your way to the entrance, careful not to jostle the shelves. As you step into the night air, the scent of clay and ink still clings to you, warm and faintly sacred. Behind you, the scriptorium breathes. And now here you are back in your bed, wrapped in your own kind of linen, breathing a little slower than before. The whisper of Babylon still hums in the back of your mind, soft as sandalwood, ancient as dust. You can almost feel the cool of the tablets beneath your fingertips, still slightly rough from the stylus, still waiting patiently to be read again. You think of Enlil Bani, bent over his final ledger, not for power, not for praise, but because that's how memory is kept alive. Not in grand speeches or monuments, but in tiny wedge marks, carefully made. Quiet gestures, kind record keeping, the soft art of noticing what matters. Maybe your own memory works the same way. Little moments pressed gently into the clay of your day conversations, dreams, things left unsaid. And maybe that's what sleep is too. The final shelving of the day's story. The gentle promise that everything has been returned, and tomorrow begins with a clear tablet. So breathe in, deeper now.